Que lo que mi gente, welcome to the Monoplaza F1 podcast. As always, I'm your host, Emi Bertre, and this week we are going to be covering the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Yay! Yeah, anyway, so it's another dominant week for Red Bull. Max Verstappen, P1, Checo Perez, P2. For Max, that would be his 56th ever race win, his 100th podium, his 9th in a row. I could keep going on and on and on. You get the picture. For Checo, that's P2, staying close to Max in the championship if you believe there's actually going to be a competition between those two. Yeah, basically at this point it really does feel like the championship is Max Verstappen's to lose. Like, seriously, I'm not seeing anything from any other team except for maybe Ferrari that would indicate that we're going to have a legitimate and true title fight on our hands, because I'm not even seeing one between the two Red Bull teammates. But I digress, right? So yeah, another Red Bull 1-2. Great, shouts out to them. It never really felt like there was any doubt who was going to be the winner of the race. Now, granted, Verstappen did not lead the entire race like he did in the Bahrain GP last week. Lando Norris became the first non-Red Bull driver this season to lead a race. Shouts out to him. Shouts out to McLaren. But yeah, honestly, it was mostly because Verstappen had the pit and he was easily able to catch up and pass Lando on track. And on his merry way off to Australia, he went. Now, I'm going to say this now. I'm going to get this race stuff with Red Bull out of the way first so we can get into all of the drama that is surrounding the team. Before any of that, again, congratulations to Red Bull. Congratulations to that team. I, again, really feel like this championship is theirs to lose. In spite of all the stuff surrounding the team, they continue to do it. But again, this race was never in contention. It never felt like Verstappen wasn't going to win. So, yeah, be serious, y'all. Just be for real. Now, most of the talk on the paddock this past week surrounding Red Bull was about their not-so-private civil war that's going on behind the scenes. Yeah. So Thursday, it was revealed that Horner's victim had been suspended for what the team said was essentially lying. But really, it just seemed like she was being suspended because Christian Horner felt uncomfortable around her. So I guess just imagine, if you will, you accuse of somebody of creating a hostile work environment. They do an independent investigation. Doesn't necessarily clear him of wrongdoing, but sure. Whatever. In the meantime, your person that's causing all of this for you is not suspended. You still have to work alongside them. You still have to see them every day. And yeah, at the end of it, the team does an investigation. Again, nothing comes of it. And you're still working with this person. And then the team decides, hey, we feel like you were lying. And so we're going to do our own investigation. And while we do this investigation, we're going to go ahead and suspend you. Sound good? Yeah. Anyway, so that's kind of what's been happening. So yeah, she was suspended amidst reports that she did get a payout amount of £700,000, which the team increased to £1 million. I don't have the source for that. That's just something I read. So definitely fact check me on that. Anyways, so Thursday, she was suspended. Then Friday, it was revealed that Dr. Muerte himself, Dr. Helmut Marko, was facing disciplinary action from the team and facing possible suspension for allegedly being the one who leaked the Horner Google Drive. So you remember last week, somebody released something that had about 100 WhatsApp messages or whatever it was and a bunch of different pictures. I didn't see it. I have no interest in seeing it. Frankly, I just don't want to get an unexpected surprise. And also, it's not really any of my business. But they're potentially talking about suspending Helmut Marko for being the source of this alleged leak. And the only thing that I guess I have to ask in return to that is, does Helmut Marko know what a Google Drive is? Like, he does not strike me as someone who is really tech savvy. Now, don't get it twisted. I'm a millennial. I am a child who has boomer parents. It does not matter how many times I show them how to fire up the old PC and get it going. They would just rather have me do it. So again, full circle. If Helmut Marko was in fact the source of these leaks, do any of us actually believe that he acted alone? I'm not saying, but I'm saying. Anyway, so this possible suspension by Helmut Marko when these reports were released set off another chain of events, whereas Marko was actually prohibited from speaking to the media. Now, if you know anything about Helmut Marko, the mic always seems to find that guy, or he always seems to find the mic, because he's always good for a hot quote, a hot racial quote, a hot racist quote. You know what? Hey, Checo let it go. I should let it go. Anyways, Marco's never shy about his opinions, and so Red Bull said, hey, buddy, you can't talk to the media, all right? And, of course, about an hour after that, Marko was on the TV giving an interview to Sky Germany. So, yeah, Dr. Muerte, El Doctor, he cannot... he can't help himself, obviously. And basically, he gave a veiled talk that essentially amounted to, so during this interview with Sky Germany, it was very thinly veiled, that basically saying that, hey, there is a possibility that some of these rumors might be true, and specifically he was referring to the one of him facing disciplinary action and him possibly getting suspended. Okay, so now Helmut Marko might be suspended from Red Bull. So we've got two, right? The accuser suspended, Helmut Marko possibly suspended. This then set off yet another chain of events where Max Verstappen, during the post-quali press conference, was essentially asked, hey, I'm sure you've heard the rumors. Dr. Marko might be suspended or is facing disciplinary actions. Do you have any thoughts on it? Again, I'm paraphrasing. And Max stood 10 toes down. He stood on business and basically said, hey, I am Team Marko, and there will be a problem if he is no longer on the team. Now, this fuels speculations because, as many has pointed out, Max Verstappen is very loyal to Helmut Marko. Helmut Marko obviously thinks highly of Max Verstappen. Max Verstappen's father, Jos Verstappen, also thinks highly of Max Verstappen. So you've got those three, and then you've got Christian Horner. Cool, right? And so now the team is facing the possibility that if Marko is relieved of his duties, Max Verstappen, again, as many have pointed out, has a clause in his contract that lets him opt out should Helmut Marko no longer be a member of that team. So one could say that Verstappen is a ride or die for Helmut Marko. Hey, shouts out to him. Again, he stood 10 toes down on that. And so essentially what he's saying, if he's gone, I'm gone. Right? Of course, you know, the cause of all of this, and the man who basically stands at the center of this seems to be completely unbothered. Christian Horner has basically gone on the offensive in like some real Game of Thrones type thing, minus all of that, because he feels obviously empowered by the backing that he has from the Thai portion of that team, or the Thai ownership, right? And so now Horner, again, behind the scenes or whatever, is trying to get rid of the people who tried to oust him, right? And so more than that, there was another report by a German publication that was saying that Horner feels like he is the architect and the reason why Red Bull has been so successful throughout these years. Not the team advisor. Nope. Dr. Muerte, it's not you. It's me. Not the aero savant himself, the aero god Adrian Newey, who created a rocket ship. Nope, not him, Christian Horner. And definitely not the once-in-a-generational talent of Max Verstappen. The success of Red Bull is solely on Christian Horner. At least that's what he believes. And so, while all of that is going on, he then goes on to release a statement that basically amounts to saying, hey, no one is bigger than the team. Of course, in this instance, he is talking about Max Verstappen based on that interview, but casually ignores how he is essentially placing himself above the team, right? So, whatever. In the meantime, Max keeps doing what he's doing. He's racking up these wins, goes unchallenged. But basically, everywhere else on the paddock, I get the feeling that the other teams are preying on the downfall of Red Bull. and that they're praying that the hubris of Christian Horner is going to be the tool that takes him down. Of course, you've heard reports that Toto Wolff is, flirting with Verstappen, trying to entice Verstappen to come onto the team, going as far as saying that, hey, you can bring Helmut Marko with you. I highly doubt that would actually happen. I don't know what the level of respect between Mr. Wolff and Dr. Marko, or Mr. Wolff and the Verstappens is. I leave that there. The last thing I guess that I will say about this is that Kanye West famously said this, and I feel like this is appropriate at least for Christian Horner right now. No one man should have all of that power. That's it. And basically what Red Bull as an organization, all the ownership, whether it's the Austrian part or the Thai part, basically has to say, do we want to back Christian Horner at the detriment or to the detriment of Red Bull? Do we really want to ostracize the kid who has basically won us 3 championships in a row, is on his way to win the 4th one, possibly a 5th one next year if nobody catches up? Or do we want to keep Christian Horner, who is the self-proclaimed architect of the team? I don't know. Red Bull's got to figure it out. It would be nice to get back to racing. I would say that all of this affects us. My heart still goes out to that victim, who I think is probably going to have to pursue a civil case against Christian Horner. But again, just think about how awkward it would be if you went to HR, complained about somebody who was making you feel super uncomfortable at work. HR did an investigation, and like HR usually does, since they represent the company and not your interests, if you didn't know that about HR, you should, at least in the States. Came back and said, no, he's good. He's good. And not only that, we think you're lying. You're suspended. So it's a terrible situation for the person that brought these accusations to light. In the meantime, Horner still has a job. At the time of this recording, a new report has come out that said there's a possibility that Christian Horner won't even be the team principal in 2 weeks' time by the time we get to Alpine Park or Australia. I'll believe it when I see it, right? So Horner will be gone, maybe, but until he's actually gone, I won't believe that. In the meantime, I don't think it really affects Max Verstappen. I don't think it affects anybody else on the team because, again, Verstappen's a machine. And frankly, F1 is probably his side job. His full-time job is actually sim racing. Yeah. Anyways, so we'll see. Again, it is not necessarily related to the Saudi Arabian GP, but it is things that are sort of affecting. It's just like a dark cloud that looms over Red Bull. Until they handle the situation, reports are going to be coming out of this person's leaving, this person's suspended, this person's doing it, this is the cause. It doesn't matter. Max continues to race. So if you're a Red Bull fan, while dad and dad are fighting, the son is out there and doing what he does and where he's going to do it. And again, just to be clear, it is Max in that car. And I hope everyone recognizes it. Of course, Adrian Newey created an amazing rocket ship of a car. But Checo Perez is also driving that car. And I don't want to hear that the car is tuned to Max Verstappen, blah, 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 this, that, and the third. Sure. Checo's also in that car. Do we honestly feel that if Max Verstappen left Red Bull and it was Checo Perez and somebody else driving the same car, they would be as successful as they are? Just search your feelings. You know this to be true. Anyways, so yeah, it is basically just a big telenovela over at Red Bull. Hopefully it sorts itself out. Hopefully the victim gets justice. And I don't know. But again, if I were Red Bull and I'm seeing what the cause of all of this is, I would not hesitate to give Christian Horner his severance, his stock options, and send him on his merry way. That's me. I'm just a regular guy. Anyways, moving on. Ferrari. Yeah, hey. So let's move on to Ferrari. Let's get back to racing. So Ferrari actually had a really good weekend. The team did. They scored another podium. Shouts out Charles Leclerc, who is actually doing a pretty good job. When that car is underneath him, I know we're only 2 races in. Leclerc is basically doing the most, and he's giving Ferrari results. Put that car not on pole, but he put it in the front row. That is, I think, the 7th consecutive time that he's put that car either in P1 or P2, so a front row. So shouts out to Leclerc. But the bigger news coming out of Ferrari, of course, was that Carlitos Sainz would be out. He had to get an appendectomy, his appendix. So the whole weekend, Sainz had been talking about, I don't feel well. That was a terrible accent. Don't let me continue doing accents. Anyways, Sainz had been complaining about stomach issues that basically felt like, oh man, it's probably food poisoning, this, that, and the third. He was able to take part of FP1, FP2, and did pretty decent. So, hey, Guerrero, shouts out to Carlos Sainz. And then it turns out that actually he needed to have his appendix removed. Someone smarter than me, please tell me what is going on with these F1 drivers and their appendixes. Appendices? Yeah, I don't know. Anyways, because much like in 2022, one driver's misfortune is another driver's time to shine. And so, with the news that Sainz would be out, enter young Oliver Bearman. And by the way, shouts out to Fred Vassar for bringing in Oliver Bearman, of course. Bearman is the next up. He's the next talent that's coming up. We've been hearing a lot about him. He is a Haas reserve. He is an F2 driver. He actually had gotten pole position for the F2 race. He's also a Ferrari Academy junior driver. Super talent, just waiting in the ranks, waiting for his turn into it. Vasseur just called him up. He could have probably called up, I don't know who the ultra old reserve for Ferrari is. It's not Giovinazzi. It doesn't matter. Anyways, and so they called up Oliver Bearman, 18 years, old, man boy, doesn't matter, super talented. And I have to honestly give credit to Vasseur for calling him up instead of going younger, because it's early in the season, not a whole lot to lose. Vasseur would basically go on to tell Bearman, your only job is to keep that car together. I don't need you to be a hero. I don't need you to try to go for points. I just need to bring that car in. This is a great opportunity for you to get some training in. Awesome. And Bearman honestly delivered. Seriously, like this kid, in spite of his inexperience in F1. Now I know last season he had done some free practice runs for Haas, and although Haas is a customer team for Ferrari, their car is not a Ferrari, right? So if there was a debut as good as any starting in a Ferrari, your first official F1 race in a Ferrari is not a bad way to start. And again, Bearman did extremely well. He came in, had a decent FP3 before my man Zhao Guanyu blasted that car into the barriers, which would obviously force him to miss out quali. Bearman was doing pretty decent. In quali itself, he missed out going into Q3 by 0.003, so he almost knocked out Lewis Hamilton. And I don't know if that's more speaking of how bad the W15 is, more on that later, how good Bearman is, or just some combo of both. But anyways, the kid was able to get P11, and during the race he was able to convert that P11 into a P7. Yeah, honestly, strong showing by Oliver Bearman. And, you know, obviously everybody was nervous for him. Shouts out to his dad, by the way. It's always nice to see when parents are supporting their kids' dreams. His poor dad was probably more nervous than Bearman was. The only other thing is that obviously because he was racing in F1 this weekend, he was not able to take part in any of the F2 festivities, and so now he's actually last in the drivers championship for the F2 side, but I'm not sure Bearman actually cares. He got an F1 drive, got an F1 race. What'll be interesting to see is if he will be racing in Australia, or if Sainz will be able to recuperate in 2 weeks time and be able to come back. We'll see. But I think the team showed great credit or great faith in Oliver Bearman. I think he really paid off, or the return on investment for Ferrari was paid off by basically Bearman going in and exceeding any and all expectations, kept the car intact, got some points, is now 10th in the F1 Drivers' Championship, so that's crazy. The other funny moment that kind of happened during the race was that Bearman at one point was behind Nico Hülkenberg and was basically saying like, gosh, this car is so slow, talking about the Haas, talking about Nico. And I don't know how to tell him this. Hey, pal, Ollie, listen, you will probably get a drive in F1 next season. It's probably going to be for Haas, because Ferrari just committed to Lewis Hamilton and feels like they committed to Lewis Hamilton long term. So best case scenario, you'll be in a Ferrari in 3 years time. Best case, right? So they got Lewis on 1+2, and then maybe Lewis retires. So yeah, sit tight, pal. You're going to be in a Haas for a long time. But anyways, it's kind of funny because he was behind Hülkenberg and he was basically saying like, oh, this car is so slow. Now, the awkward moment, I want y'all to go back and watch the interviews. The awkward moment came when they interviewed him post-race and asked him about that. And he was talking about, no, I'm not saying like the car was slow. I'm saying he was slow. And of course, Hülkenberg walks right behind Bearman as he's saying it. I don't know, pretty hilarious. He hasn't had that PR training yet. He's literally just a kid, probably super excited to see it. But yeah, I don't know. So yeah, it was a great showing by Ollie Bearman. Ended up getting driver of the day, much deserved. Did really well. Really excited to see that young talent once he finally gets his shot. And I'm going to call it the big leagues, maybe not an F1 term, but for me it's the big leagues, right? If your minors or your juniors or your lower league is F2, obviously F1 is the big league. Now, I would be remiss to say that, I know I mentioned early on, Charles Leclerc also had a really, really great weekend. He was able to capitalize. And we're starting to see not only pace from Ferrari, but an improvement on tire degradation from last year. Last year, the story was they were great on a single lap, but over race pace, the tire deg would eat up those tires, and Ferrari would basically be relegated to the back. It feels like, again, there's only 2 races in, it feels like perhaps they have solved those tire deg issues. I don't know. But Leclerc, honestly, he wasn't able to get past Max during the race start. He was able to hold off Paris for a little bit. Obviously, he got passed on track by Paris. Either way, I thought Leclerc did great. A podium for him is great. It's great for Ferrari. Ferrari now sits at number 2 in the Constructors' Championship, so that's great. And also, again, I mentioned this last episode. It is interesting to see that Lewis Hamilton is... he is he is ready for next year. I believe the W15 is a tractor. It's a better car for sure than W13 and W14, but it's not fast. It feels like there's still some issues with it that they need to figure out. Anyways, the entire weekend, aside from his Mercedes duties, all you see is Hamilton with Leclerc, Hamilton with Bearman, Hamilton with Bearman and Leclerc. Not a lot of Hamilton and Russell, again, unless there was some Mercedes event that they both had to be in. So, yeah, interesting to watch. So, for Sir Lewis, I would just say to you, hey, pal, you only have 22 races, all right? 22 races. Anyways, great showing by Ferrari. It was really good. And, of course, I touched on Haas earlier when my boy Bearman was blazing them. But Haas honestly had a really, really good weekend for Haas. They finally got a championship point. So now they are the 6th team to get a point this season. Again, we're only 2 races in. Yes, the teams are really close together. Formula One, the pack, no, it's not. The 6th team. So obviously it's been Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari, Aston, and McLaren getting all the points. So welcome to the club, Haas. But the biggest story is Kevin Magnussen, who was terrorizing everybody on track. He really took one for the team, and thanks to some great team strategy, was basically able to hold everyone off from P12 on down. So that's in spite of a combined time penalty of 20 seconds. So what happened is Magnussen would cut corners and overtake off track or whatever he did. He would receive a penalty of 10 seconds. He got 2 of those. And what's crazy is that he was basically able to hold the pack back at a pace of 1.5 seconds a lap slower to give Hülkenberg enough of a window to pit safely, come back, and he'd still be in P10. And once Hulkenberg ended up pitting, who he was one of the last 3 to pit, it was Hamilton, Lando Norris, and Hulkenberg were the last 3 to pit. Once Hulkenberg finally came back, again, Magnussen had done a great job of basically holding off everybody from P12 on down. Albon was able to pass him. Shouts out to him. But by that point, Albon was probably too late to pass Hulkenberg on track. And so, thanks to that, Hulkenberg obviously was able to finish P10, bring some home points for the team. Again, this is the 6th team to get a championship point. Regardless of that, I really, really like what Ayo Komatsu is doing with that team. And perhaps it's what the team needed. I mean, I know there's a lot of Gunther Steiner fans out there, but frankly, the team needed something, right? Haas is the butt of everyone's jokes, is a terrible car. I'm one of those because, frankly, what is Haas giving us that Andretti's not giving us? I echo the opinion and the sentiment of a lot of people. But they probably needed a change. They probably needed a different strategy. And, Ayo's really... he knows his stuff. He's another variation of James Valls. Obviously, he's like his own person, but it's somebody who brings quiet confidence to the team, who has knowledge, who has a racing mind, all the above. And it is going to be exciting to see how far Haas can go with him as the TP. Obviously, it's still a Haas. Obviously, they need to build up that talent, but now that the team is under his direction, who knows? Maybe we will see more out of it. But I thought Haas, really, the main reason I'm talking about it is because Kevin Magnussen was really, really terrorizing that team. And 2 races into the season, it feels like he is going to be able to contribute more to this team. Now, it'll be interesting to see what happens next season, whether it's him or Hulkenberg who stays. Obviously, Hulkenberg has been linked with Sauber and Audi and that project that's coming up, which, by the way, shouts out, Audi finally committed more than 75, but 100% into buying an F1 team. They bought all the shares they needed to. I know that there had been speculation that perhaps Audi was getting cold feet and they didn't want to do it, but this past week, fully committed. So the reason I'm bringing that up, Hulkenberg is a driver. Of course, he's German. This is a German company who has been linked to Audi, Sauber, Audi, him and Sainz, because obviously Sainz's father races for Audi as well. So if Hulkenberg is a true target for Audi and he does end up going there, that obviously leaves an empty seat. Bearman comes in. If that is not the case and Hulkenberg does not leave, although he has signaled that he wants to perhaps race for a team that's higher up on the grid, I believe Haas really does have to make a decision. Do they want to keep their veteran drivers in, or do they want to, unfortunately, let one of them go to bring in a younger talent? I believe the smart move here, you more or less get the same from Hulkenberg and Magnussen. I know Hulkenberg obviously has the pedigree, right? And he's got this terrible streak of most races without a podium. I get that, but he has the pedigree to be an amazing driver. Magnussen, obviously, there's a reason why he is still a driver in F1. But I do think that they need to let one of those guys go to make room for Bearman. Now, whether they leave because they join another team or they leave because the team makes the decision, I don't know. But I don't see both of those guys on that team next year. And we need a Bearman to come into F1. We need younger talent. We need some of these older guys to maybe perhaps think about retiring, or at least have teams thinking about the future of their programs, right? So anyways, shouts out to Haas. Congratulations. They finished P10. That's a point for Hulkenberg. That's a point for Haas. And again, they become the 6th team to get a championship point. Now, in terms of other teams, I thought McLaren did really, really well. Their form, honestly, to start the season has been a lot better. A lot better than last season. And thanks to that, they passed Mercedes in the Constructors' Championship and are now 3rd on points, right? So not a great look for Mercedes. It's another customer team similar to Aston Martin last year. Now you have McLaren, albeit it's only 2 races in. They passed them by 2 points. Cool. But they have started this season off a lot better than they did last season. They have strong qualies, so they were able to lock out the third row. I'm sure that they could have done better, but still getting that third row isn't terrible. Obviously, 6th and 7th is not bad, but having your teammate alongside you is good for strategy as well. Again, really like the progress that they've made from last year to this year. I feel like the trajectory is going up. I also, admittedly, I'm a huge Zach Brown fan. Maybe because it's that American flavor into F1, but maybe because I honestly feel like he is one of the few team principals, or not, he's not even a team principal, but just leadership in a team that I can stand. But again, he's a guy who has built the name of McLaren back up from where it was. He's got a bunch of sponsors in. It doesn't matter. Anyways, he's built that team up. The other thing is that I really like the driver pairing that they've got at McLaren. Like the driver or the dynamic between Norris and Piastri seems really good. Again, I talked about this last year. The calculated risk that McLaren took has been paying dividends because Piastri, I think, really is a great driver. He's actually low-key a really funny guy, by the way. Super funny. But yeah, the race for McLaren probably was not as good as they could have been. They were fast in a straight line. They were slow in those high-speed corners, and it basically relegated them to their positions for the bulk of the race. Now, unfortunately, young Piastri was the unintended recipient of a Lewis Hamilton masterclass. Again, Lewis did not pit, so he was sitting with those mediums that he had for basically from the start of the race on to, I think, lap 35, 36, 37, 38, somewhere in the high 30s. Lewis was on the mediums. At some point, Piastri pit, landed behind Hamilton. It always feels like these two are always racing against each other. It's really great to see. Again, really like them both. They know how to race each other. Piastri, I think, is getting a trial by fire, unfortunately. So last week, you saw that Piastri came out of the pits before Hamilton. His tires were cold, so he lost position to Hamilton and was not able to regain it. Last year, you saw that they had a couple of meetings in different races where Hamilton may or may not have forced Piastri off the track. I'm not here to argue that. And this past race, so the Saudi Arabian GP, right? Piastri was just behind Hamilton, and I got to believe he was super frustrated by Hamilton. He tried to pass him. He did at one point, but braked too late and lost control. So Hamilton was able to take the position back. And he would get 0.3 close behind Hamilton, 0.5, 7, whatever. Again, he would catch up to him in the straights, DRS wide open, but he was not able to capitalize by the time they got into those high-speed corners, which luckily for Mercedes, they were faster than McLaren in the high-speed corners this race. Nevertheless, he, by his own words, became an expert on the Mercedes rear wing and just the whole housing. But it was fun to watch that battle on track. Sorry to that man for having to be the one and only recipient of the Hamilton defensive masterclass. Norris had a decent race. Now, there was, I'm not going to say a bit of controversy. Before that race started, Norris did a false start. You saw it on the video. Obviously, I've said this in the past. All of the drivers, they're all feds. They're all federales. They narc on each other all the time. And of course, George Russell was on the radio. Hey, Norris, false start. Tell the stewards. Sure. The stewards did their investigation and basically decided, nope, no incident. We're good. And the explanation that they gave, in spite of the video evidence, in spite of Norris's tires passing that white line, was that they're saying we have sensors in those cars. Those sensors show Norris as not moving. We're going to go by that. And I'm just like, okay, but you see the video evidence, right? The sensor didn't move. They're not infallible, but you see the video evidence. Right? Anyways, so nothing came of it. Norris was able to beat it. By the way, Norris, Hamilton, Russell, and Bearman, four British drivers, became the first British driver since 1968 to all score points in one Grand Prix Britain. What's going on? Anyways, so yeah, I would say Norris had a pretty quiet race. He did lead the race for a little bit. So he, again, became the first non-Red Bull driver to lead a race. Congrats. Yeah, but he got passed by Verstappen, who is inevitable. We're not here to talk that. Still, it'll be exciting to see what happens with McLaren throughout the season, when they got upgrades coming, when I don't know, the car perhaps is in a better setup window. And by the way, this is now a 1-1 in qualifying and race. So last week, Norris out-qualified Piastri and finished ahead of him. This week, Piastri out-qualified Norris and finished ahead of him in the race. So again, it's an evenly matched pair, I believe, and definitely interesting to watch. Now, Mercedes. Oh, Mercedes. It is starting to look like the W15 is perhaps a dud. Yeah, it's not too soon to call it that. Maybe I'm jumping to conclusions. The season's still early. I don't know. During preseason tests, you saw that the drivers seemed to be really happy with that car. It felt like a car for the first time in 3 years. Hamilton's words. Last week during FP2, him and George sat 1 and 2 respectively. Again, that's just free practice. Everybody gets hyped up. Everyone's like, oh man, do we have a championship battle on our hand? Was Mercedes really sandbagging? No, they were not. It feels like they still do not have the car in the right setup. Whatever. It feels like the W15 perhaps is going to be a dud. Might be better than the W14. Jury's still out. But maybe they're setting it up for the W16, which will be the last ground effects car before they move to the new regulations, which focus more on engine. Of course, Mercedes makes really great engines. I don't know. But it is not a good car. 2 races in, I'm not overly impressed. Of course, Mercedes was able to lock out 7th and 8th. So shouts out to them, I guess. They locked out the 4th row. Yeah, it was really weird. The qualifying went pretty terrible for Mercedes. All weekend, Hamilton had been complaining about the car, the rear, it's sliding back and forth. He doesn't have confidence in it. And Hamilton's a big one that says, if I don't trust the rear of the car and if it's sliding around, I can't put up a lap that makes sense. Russell, I thought, was probably going to out-qualify him by a lot. He did end up out-qualifying Hamilton, but only by 1 position, and that's because, again, the car slid out from under him. He could not complete it, and he had to abort his final quali lap, right? Yeah, and when you get into the race, they start 8 and 9, and they're not really able to capitalize or make up any positions past that. By the way, they were out-qualified by the McLaren's customer team, out-qualified by Fernando Alonso customer team, and of course out-qualified by Red Bull. No surprise. Ferrari, not as big of a surprise, right? So I don't even think that at this point they are even the 3rd fastest. I give them maybe 4th or 5th, depending on the track and the weekend, of course. Of course, it is just 2 weeks in. So we'll see. But yeah, that car was not super fast in a straight line, made up for it in those high-speed corners. That's great. In spite of that, obviously, they were only able to qualify, like I said, 8 or 9. Yeah, and it just never seemed to be there for Hamilton in particular. However, if you look at the race data, his race pace was actually faster than George Russell's. But it doesn't matter. Russell finished ahead of him. I think that this track, it's one of the fastest tracks in the season, but it is, in my mind, maybe a bit of a dud. And that's something for street courses. There are some that I feel like, yeah, these are really great. They belong on here. But there is what I feel like a propensity right now for F1 to continue creating street races. Cool, we want to bring it to more cities. We want to make more money. But what you give up with that is the ability to have a track where people can pass easily on track, right? So they're all turning into, in my mind, cheaper versions of Monaco, right? Where like qualifying position is really important because for the most part, you won't be able to pass anybody on track. Anyways, so back to Mercedes, right? Like the early feeling with the W15 was that it was head and shoulders above the W13 and W14. We have these correlations between this, that, and the third, blah, 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 blah. But, I will say that even though the driver said the car is really good, they have kind of varied in what they're saying, right? So if you ask Russell, he's saying, hey, this car is a large improvement and it's great and it's going to get us race wins. If you ask Hamilton, he's basically saying that, yeah, sure, the car is an improvement, but by and large, we're still dealing with the same issues that we've had like for the last 2 or 3 years, right? So for Hamilton, it's like, yeah, we've got a car, but we're still dealing with this stuff and we can't really get it into the right window, right? So I kind of tend to agree with what's happening with Hamilton. Now, when we get to the actual race, I felt like the strategy was a little bit weird. Obviously, an early safety car, since Stroll ended up kissing a wall, then crashing into a wall, gave the optimal strategy to Russell, which meant he came in and he was able to get a fresh set of hards and go on about his merry way. They left Hamilton out, in my opinion, they left him out too long, way too long, and basically gave him 12 laps on softs to try and pass Lando, catch Bearman, and pass Bearman. Again, I just got done saying this track was not great for passing. So I don't really understand the strategy, and I get it. You want to put your drivers on 2 different strategies, and they took a gamble. The gamble did not pay off. Yeah, I have to think that they gave the optimal strategy to Russell because he was in the lead, because he had qualified, because wherever he was, sure. And it wasn't because Hamilton's leaving next year, so of course we're going to give the optimal strategy to Russell. Hopefully, when they look at the race pace and realize that Hamilton is faster in a race than Russell is, they might at least think, what's more important? Getting those Constructors' Championship points or placating the driver who's staying next year, who's going to be our driver moving forward? I don't know. We'll see how the year pans out for Mercedes. I honestly am tampering my expectations super low. I thought that perhaps they could kind of challenge for some race wins, but right now I'm not seeing anything from them, and I feel like a Ferrari or maybe a McLaren is going to get a race win this season ahead of Mercedes. And honestly, it might be the second year in a row where they don't get a race win, and the third year in a row where they only have 1 race win to show for it. I don't know. Additionally to that, Hamilton keeps playing with his setup. Not necessarily an excuse, but sure. Now he is down 0-2 to Russell in both qualifying and race finishes. So again, we will see what happens. Next race obviously is Australia. Mercedes did really well in Australia last year. Double podium. Yeah. We'll see. Yeah. Another customer team obviously for Mercedes is Aston Martin. Just briefly touching on Alonso. Alonso is one who he had a great race. He was able to hold off Russell in a slower car. He's still doing the most over at Aston. And again, until that changes, until they get a driver who can consistently compete. At this point, we're not even looking at drivers who are better than Alonso. We're just looking at drivers who consistently compete. Then Alonso's going to be doing it all by himself, right? Like Stroll had a great drive last week. This week, it was a little bit reminiscent of what would happen last year, right? So, again, he had this incident where he barely grazed the wall on his left side, but that was enough to mess his left tire up, so he wasn't able to turn, ended up crashing, so he was out, safety car out. Okay, cool. Alonso, it was up to him to basically bring some points in for the team. Now, Alonso is not someone who I would say is super loyal to a team. Let's be honest, 3 stints at Renault, 1 stint at McLaren, or 2 stints at McLaren, 1 with Ferrari, and now at Aston. He is also now one of the names being considered for Mercedes once Hamilton leaves. So again, it would be not shocking if Fernando Alonso was not on Aston next year, but right now he's weighing his options. Does he retire? I think he's maybe got 1 more year left in him. Does he stay in Aston? I don't think so. If not Aston, is he going to go to Mercedes? That seems like the most likely landing spot, unless Mercedes is able to land Max Verstappen. I don't know. But in spite of that, it feels like his patience with the car is gone, and he basically just wants to, my feeling is, get the next victory. Just get 1 more victory and then go on about his merry way and go to the next thing. I don't know. But again, for Aston Martin to be successful, for Lawrence Stroll to take that team to the highest of the highs, he has got to stop being the Lulu and have a serious conversation with his son. And hey, I get it. It's his kid. Lance Stroll's biggest knock is that his dad really loves him. But I think that love is blinding Lawrence Stroll. So he's got to figure out, do I want the team to excel and do great and get those championships like I guaranteed they would? Or do I want to keep supporting my son in his dream of being a race car driver? I don't know. But I don't think Alonso's going to stick around long enough to figure that out. Anyways, he was able to finish the race. He was able to get some points. He did an amazing job. You would expect nothing less of holding off Russell, who technically speaking had the faster car. Great. Shouts out to them. Actually, shouts out to Alonso and Alonso only. I said what I said. But still, that is a lot better. So Aston Martin is still a lot better than Alpine, Renault. Renault, Alpine. Pierre Gasly became the first retirement of the season for Alpine. Had some gearbox issues. He was out. Didn't even finish the race, right? All I'm going to say is it must be a miserable experience to be an Alpine driver. The car is somehow slower this year than it was last year. Yeah, I don't know. The only thing I will say for Alpine is, Esteban Ocon, great spirits. Seems like he wants to still be on Alpine. Granted, he has also been linked to the potential Mercedes seat. I doubt that's going to happen. You know what? Here's what I'm going to say about Alpine. All right, positive. Their junior teams, F2, seem to be doing really well. Their F1 Academy team, or their driver, shouts out Abby Poling, got a race win this past weekend in the first race of the F1A season. So their junior teams for Alpine are doing great. But Alpine, as a works manufacturer, should not be doing this terrible. And I know they cleaned house, and I know they let a bunch of people go. Yeah, it's not looking great. So probably the worst team on the grid right now, unfortunately, is Alpine. They are below even Haas, below even Williams, but maybe on the same level as Steak Sauber. I don't know. Yeah, so hopefully they figure it out. Now, the last team that I want to talk about is VCAR, Visa Cash App, RB, Visa Cash App, Racing Bulls, Toro Rosso. I don't know. All I'm going to say is, hey, man, y'all got to leave Yuki Tsunoda alone. All right? Yuki got a lot of flack last week. I spoke briefly about, hey, they are being really harsh on him. I get that his reactions are... his reactions are crazy. But in my mind, again, he is no more passionate than any other driver. They just love to put him on the radio because they know they're going to get a good soundbite from Yuki. But, hey, man, you know what? La Yuquita, that's what we call him in DR, right? La Yuquita was able to out-qualify his teammate again, and this time he was allowed to finish in front of Ricciardo. And I really think Yuki does not get the credit that he's due simply because everyone's so focused on his on-track persona. But he's a fast driver. I do think that once Honda becomes the Aston Martin engine manufacturer, right? That's upcoming. The Aston Martin might actually be a good seat for Yuki. I doubt Lawrence Stroll is interested in Yuki, but Honda might be interested in Yuki. Just saying. But yeah, that could be a spot that would suit Yuki if he doesn't want to be a part of the Red Bull family. I know that he's potentially been linked to that Red Bull seat. Everyone is obviously preying on Checo, and it's basically a foregone conclusion that he's going to be gone next season. I don't really see it. Anyways, but yeah, we'll see how Yuki does this week. He did decent. Terrorized by K-Mag as he often was, but you saw that instead of losing his mind, he's like, hey, that's some really dangerous drive. I don't know. Something happened day or night. But in my mind, I think so. 2 races in, he is proving to be faster than Daniel Ricciardo, who is the supposed next driver up at Red Bull. Now, we will see if Christian Horner is forced out, whether or not Daniel Ricciardo actually takes that seat away from Checo. Again, I feel like that would be a huge mistake because I don't think Ricciardo is bringing to Red Bull what Checo is bringing to Red Bull in terms of revenue and even in terms of driving pedigree. I said what I said. Yes, I think Checo is a better driver than Ricciardo. Ricciardo, to me, right now, is just a great soundbite, a great PR guy, a great person to have around if you want to have fun times. But in terms of, is he a better driver than Checo? I don't think right now he's a better driver than Yuki Tsunoda. Right? He hasn't really impressed, obviously. Yeah, he basically did a little bit of self-harm towards the end of the race. Ricciardo spun out. No one forced him. No one tapped him. Nothing. So, again, maybe he's in his head. But what I'm seeing out of Ricciardo right now is what I was seeing at McLaren his last year there. So, what I'm seeing out of Ricciardo now is what I was seeing from Ricciardo at McLaren in 2022. And, frankly, he probably should have never left Red Bull. He probably should have never left Renault if he was. But all this team hopping, I think that Ricciardo, people need to think long and hard about whether or not he deserves a shot, or if you want to keep Liam Lawson waiting in the ranks, or if you want to remove a Checo to give Ricciardo that seat. Does Red Bull want to take that gamble? They would be losing a ton of money, and again, they would be losing a driver who, for all intents and purposes, feels like it sits there because Christian Horner likes him, and Christian Horner might not even be there for a long time, and because he gets along with Max Verstappen. But is he going to be as good of a second driver in Red Bull as Checo is? So, yeah. I am not going to be talking a lot about Sauber. They had a pretty forgettable race. Williams also had a pretty forgettable race. I will say Logan Sargent was out-qualified and beaten by Oliver Bearman. That being said, you're comparing apples and oranges because Bearman obviously is driving a Ferrari, which is a much faster car than a Williams. But second week in a row, Williams isn't specifically Logan Sargent isn't really able to make it out. I'm sure James Valls have set some benchmarks for him, but I do not see Logan Sargent being an F1 next season. Just a thought. This week on the podcast, I am actually going to be doing something new to me and new to us and all of those who are watching, and that is driver ratings. Now, for me, I'm not going to go 1 through 10, 1 through 20. No, I'm basically going to pick my top driver and the one that I felt performed the least. And I'm going to be teaching you or giving you some culture. See, never say you never learned anything on this podcast. But our top driver is going to be El Matatan. You Google that and you look that up on Urban Dictionary. But again, bringing that Dominican culture into this. So our top driver is going to be El Matatan. And our lowest rated driver, which had probably the worst performance, in my opinion, is going to be El Pariguayo. Again, Urban Dictionary is free, y'all. So is Google. Look that up. I'll even spell that out. Pariguayo. Matatan. So Matatan, best. Pariguayo, worst. So this week's Matatan, of course, is always going to be, or was always going to be, going to young Oliver Bearman. Had an amazing, albeit temporary, debut for Ferrari. He almost got into Q3 during the quali, was able to convert a P11 to a P7, made his dad proud, and frankly, he showed that he belongs in F1. I do not think Oliver Bearman needs to be in F2 next season, and I don't feel like I was this hype when, for instance, Nick DeVries had an amazing race. I feel like their talent levels are completely different, and Bearman is at a different level. So, yeah, Matatan for this week is going to be young Master Bearman, and El Pariguayo of the week is going to go to Daniel Ricciardo. Again, this is from carryover from last week's, and I get that last week they were on different tires and there was different strategy. But I expect more out of Daniel Ricciardo, given that he is a race winner and he's actually talented. He did not show me anything during quali. And of course, we talk about that spin out during the final race. He's finished below Yuki in quali both times, finished below Yuki in the race this week. And last week, obviously, he got it because of team orders. So, yeah, he is my Pariguayo of the week. And, of course, put me in the camp of skeptical in terms of him being the one to replace Checo. Yeah, so finally, here's the last thing. The action on the track was okay. Not my favorite race, slightly better than Bahrain last week. But the off-track stuff is really the stuff that's kind of taken over. I do think that F1 needs to take a good look at itself and figure out if they want to continue to be an old boys club or if they are trying to be an inclusive sport like all their PR stuff says they are, right? Like International Women's Day, or look at all of the people of color and different backgrounds we have on our team. So either they are that, the public image they're trying to portray, or they are still an old boys club run by the likes of Bernie Ecclestone, right? If you're doing that, right? All this stuff with Horner is honestly really wild. And the fact that Horner is basically coming out of this unscathed, again, there's reports that he may be fired. Until it happens, I won't believe it. Meanwhile, again, his accuser is suspended pending an investigation. Obviously, she's not being afforded the same treatment as Horner. And honestly, I'm not sure how comfortable she would be working alongside him. I'm not sure how much Ginger Spice really would want her working alongside him. That's beside the point. All the Horner stuff aside, the FIA also has an issue with Mohammed bin Sulayem, right? MBS, of course, had reports come out this week that basically he was trying to alter the results of a race, or maybe more than one race from last season, right? Particularly the Saudi Arabian GP. I feel like he is also bringing the image of the sport down. I do feel like both of them have kind of taken the strategy, which is a great strategy, by the way, of just letting it cycle out of the news cycle until people forget about it. Again, if this were any other sport, I feel like people would be rioting, not literally, but just like not happy with what was going on, right? But those two just kind of seem to be waiting for it to die down and people to forget about it. In the meantime, the sport, which is already dealing with declining viewership, right? And an audience that for the most part is not super excited going into a race knowing who is going to win. And I'm sure they probably felt that way about when Mercedes was dominant, when Ferrari was dominant. But again, we were promised that teams would be closer together thanks to the regulation changes, that they would be fighting for race wins. That has not been the case for the last two and a half years. So yeah. The sport is taking a hit in the public arena. Maybe nobody cares. I care, but yeah, who knows? Oh well, I guess. But yeah, that is it. There is no race next week, but festivities will be resuming. In 2 weeks in Australia. So that's a home race for Oscar Piastri and Daniel Ricciardo, and I think it'll be exciting. I hope it'll be exciting. Anyways, that is it. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, tell your mommies, your papis, your tíos, your tías, abuelas, abuelos. As always, for the Monoplaza F1 podcast, I am Emi Bertre. Peace.